Hello and welcome to Down the Scope. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to any new subscribers. It's always nice for a new channel to get a little bit of attention and know that somebody's actually watching. Hopefully I'll be able to improve the flow and structure of these videos over time and stop rambling as much and just get to the pertinent details. So if we dive right back into our slide of Amphioxus, if you want, you can go back and watch the introduction video if you're not familiar with the overall anatomy of Amphioxus, because today we're going to be focusing on the gastrointestinal system. So if we zoom in on this section here on the third row at the bottom, we can find the pharynx again, which is this big structure in the middle with all of these bars. So if you remember, Amphioxus are filter feeders, so what's going to be happening is water will be coming in through the mouth and passing through the pharynx. Of course, it has to find somewhere to escape from, so it'll start off in the lumen, in this big white space here, and then pass in these spaces between these structures here and into this space here. So this is the lumen of the pharynx, this big white space. The gaps here are the gill slits, and then water will pass into this structure here, which is called the atrium. This is analogous to the space between the gills and the gill covering in fish, which is known as the Impercular Cavity. As we can see, the atrium is lined by this thin layer of cells here. This is the Atrial Epithelium. So this is going to be separating the organs, such as the ovary here, from the water, which is going to be filled with all kinds of bacteria and other nasty stuff that you don't necessarily want to be entering into your body, or the Amphioxus's body, I should say. So water enters the atrium, and then towards the back of the Amphioxus there's a pore called the Atriopore where it will leave again. So these structures here are called the Gill Bars, and it's clear from these sections that there are two kinds of gill bars. We have a tongue bar and a primordial bar. So the difference between the two is this structure here. So you can see some atrial epithelium here and then some kind of fuzzy blue material. This cavity here is part of the Salonic Cavity. So in mammals, for example, we have two body cavities, the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. In simpler animals which don't have a diaphragm, there is a shared cavity where the organs sit. This is called the Salonic Cavity, and it's the same for Amphioxus. And we'll see a larger example of the Salonic Cavity later on. So that's the anatomical difference between the primordial bars and the tongue bars, is the presence of this coelomic extension along the edge. I'm not sure what the functional significance of this is, and I've not been able to find an answer for that. You'll notice that each gill bar has this lovely blue material here. So this slide is stained with trichrome, I think, or some kind of equivalent, and with that kind of stain, connective tissue containing collagen stains up as blue. So this blue material is quite similar to the cartilage that you'd find in higher animals. It's made up of a type of collagen similar to collagen type 2 and some molecules called proteoglycans. But there's a difference with higher animal cartilage in that it's very acellular. So for example, if you go and have a look at a section of fish and you look at the cartilage, you get these wonderful chondrocytes or cartilage producing cells within little spaces called lacunae, but this cartilage is acellular. So what's happening is the cells around the edge are producing the collagen and the proteoglycans, but they're not surrounding themselves with it as it would in higher animals. So of course we can move on now to the digestive function of the pharynx, which is to trap food particles from the water that is being passed over it. And we can see this kind of browny fibrillar material here. This is all mucus, which is going to be trapping the food particles, and then cilia on the pharyngeal epithelial cells will waft the mucus up, to the top of the pharynx, where we have this large structure here called the Epibranchial Groove. And you can see there's some mucus here, and we can just make out this fuzzy line here, which are cilia on the epithelial cells here, which are going to start moving the mucus and food particles back towards the esophagus. Now all of this mucus has to be produced somewhere. So down here we have this structure, which is called the endostyle. This is the mucus producing part of the pharynx. So within this section we're going to have some mucus producing cells. You can start to see the cilia here as well, which are going to start beating the mucus up towards the Gill Bars. But the endostyle is interesting for another reason as well, because there are cells here that produce iodothyronine, which is analogous to thyroid hormone in higher animals such as birds and mammals. So thyroid hormone in mammals, for example, will regulate the metabolism. The iodothyronines produced by the endostyle have a role in metamorphosis, and there's a very interesting article which you can see here about how the iodothyronines produced by Amphioxus relate to the thyroxine molecules that are produced by vertebrates. So this structure can be thought of as the ancient precursor of our thyroid gland. So we've gone over the digestive function, we found an endocrine function for the pharynx. How about an immune function? Why not? So this is obviously the first contact point between the Amphioxus and any bacteria within the environment. So it wouldn't be surprising if some of these cells within the pharynx have an immune function. And I found a very interesting review about how the immune system of Amphioxus relates to the immune system of vertebrates. It's obviously not a very advanced system, so a lot of this immune function within the Amphioxus is going to be non-specific, not like the antibody producing immune system that vertebrates have. But some experiments are showing that the epithelium of the pharynx changes shape on contact with bacteria, and that it starts to produce factors that will bind the bacteria together and make it easier for the immune system in the gut to deal with these bacteria and stop them from causing infections. And finally, there is also another organ within the pharynx. So here we have the Epibranchial Groove at the top of the pharynx. The excretory apparatus in Amphioxus is not very well studied. The first scientists that worked out where the excretory apparatus of the Amphioxus were Frederick Weiss and Theodore Boveri, who were two competing scientists working in Naples at the end of the 19th century. They were both working for a period of 7 weeks at the same time, and they managed to publish the results independently but didn't mention each other, so perhaps they had a little bit of a falling out over their differing theories. In fact, Boveri later mentioned Weiss's work but described it as low quality and inadequately illustrated. I'm actually going to use some of Weiss's inadequate illustrations to decipher what we can see here and which components of the excretory system are present on these slides. So what Weiss did was he kept his Amphioxy in water with a red dye, which was then absorbed into the bloodstream, and from there he could follow it to the excretory system. So he had the benefit of the bloodstream being, or the blood vessels being stained red. Unfortunately, we don't. But from Weiss's detailed, inadequate illustrations, we can see that this structure here is the dorsal aorta. We can just about tell it's a blood vessel because you see these tiny black dots, these flat black dots. These are the cells lining the blood vessel called the endothelium. You can see them over here, a few more. So as well, from Weiss's drawing, we can make out that this cavity here is going to be the Salonic Cavity, which means that I suspect we can see the endothelium of the Salonic Cavity lining it down here and separating it from this structure, which I suspect is the excretory tubule. Now, the excretory tubule may also be one of these structures here. It's very difficult to pick out anything more convincing than that. Perhaps on this side we can see again the dorsal aorta, the Salonic Cavity, and then maybe an excretory tubule coming down here. So I did find something that might be a little bit more convincing as excretory tubules over in this first row here. So perhaps structures like this are the excretory tubules. If I just orientate ourselves again, we've got the dorsal aorta here, Salonic Cavity, and the first Gill Bars, with perhaps excretory tubules coming down here, and then the atrial cavity here. If you look up the nephridium of Amphioxus on Google, for example, you'll find these wonderful images with the nephridium coming up here and extending these selenocyte projections into a cavity, but it's not really clear where the fluid in the nephridium is coming from. I've not really been able to decipher that, and whether these selenocytes are extending into the atrium or the Salonic Cavity and getting rid of their nitrogenous waste that way. So unfortunately that's all the detail I've been able to find on the nephridium, but if somebody else has more detailed information, then feel free to post it in the comments. I'd find it very interesting. So that's everything about the pharynx. We have this next structure here, which if we refer back to our image of the gastrointestinal tract of Amphioxus, is the Hepatic Diverticulum. This is widely accepted to be the primordial liver, based not on its morphology, because it doesn't look anything like a liver, but because of its anatomic location and the embryological equivalents that you can find in vertebrates. Also, there's some molecular evidence. So although we can't appreciate it obviously on a histological section, gene expression analysis is becoming much more widely used tool, and people who've been working on Amphioxus have been able to demonstrate the expression of genes that are very similar to those that are expressed in vertebrate livers. So, for example, this paper focuses on G6Pase, which is glucose 6-phosphatase, which is involved in the production of glucose from glycogen. And if we just scroll down to their main figure here, this is gene expression, and they looked at various different tissues. Very high expression in the ovary for some reason, probably because it has a very high metabolic demand, but also in the what they call the digestive diverticulum, which I've called the hepatic diverticulum, where it's higher than even any other gastrointestinal organ. So we've got pretty good evidence that this is the ancient precursor for our liver. So what does this organ do in the Amphioxus? Well, it digests the food particles that are being passed to it, both extracellularly, so secreting enzymes, and also intracellularly, so it has the ability to take large molecules into these cells and then break them down. So as you can see, these cells are very long. They look nothing like the epithelium that you'd see in a mammalian gut, for example. Again, we have a fuzzy border here. These are cilia. And down here we have all of the cell nuclei. So these dark dots. And then down here we have this brown layer, which is the basement membrane connecting to a blood vessel under here. So we can tell it's a blood vessel again because we have these lovely black nuclei of the endothelial cells. You'll notice that there are no muscle layers as well, so all of the movement of the food must be done by the cilia and presumably by the flow of water generated possibly by the pharynx, although it may have dissipated by that point. So still a very primitive gut. I mean, even the earthworm that we looked at had muscle layers that were able to push ingesta along. So that's the hepatic diverticulum. If we jump over to the section in the second row, this is the midgut. So now we've lost the pharynx. This is the only kind of main structure within the Salonic Cavity. And we've got a very similar appearance to what we had in the hepatic diverticulum. So cilia on the cells, we've got a nice band of nuclei here and a lovely thick basement membrane, and then a blood vessel here, which is presumably going to be absorbing all of the good stuff that the gut's churning out. You'll notice as well that we've got a few nuclei up here. So these might be immune cells. Just as the pharynx had an immune function, the gut is obviously going to have an immune function as well. There has been a little bit of work done on the immune system in the gut of Amphioxus. So I've taken this image from a paper which looked at bacterial infections in Amphioxus back in 2010, and they discovered phagocytes. So these are the immune cells like macrophages and neutrophils in our own immune system that will detect foreign invaders and try and engulf them and digest them intracellularly. So on the left here in figure C, we've got the lumen of the gut here. So this is an electron micrograph produced by an electron microscope. So this is one single cell, and then these are going to be the enterocytes, or the cells of the Amphioxus gut. They've described this as a macrophage-like cell. We can see the cell nucleus here. So we can see the nuclear membrane, this dark rim around the outside, and then all of the genetic material clustered in there. And then this little circle here is a bacteria. I think they were using Staphylococcus. And if we have a look over at figure D, we've got the same kind of cell, so this phagocytic cell. You can see the nucleus here with the nuclear membrane and the nuclear DNA material inside. And we can see that it's engulfed some bacteria and enclosed them in these membranes here. These are called phagosomes. And then this dark structure here is a lysosome, which is going to be full of digestive enzymes which will fuse with the phagosome and break down the bacteria on the inside. And what's really lovely about this electron micrograph is that you can see this phagocyte just in the process of engulfing this bacteria here. So a really lovely study there done by Han et al. In 2010. So the last bit of gut that you can see, not very interesting, is the hind gut here. So this is just before I guess you would call it the anus. We've still got the atrium here, so this must be a little bit before the Atriopore, where the water that's passed through the pharynx is going to finally be ejected from the Amphioxus. So it's pretty much exactly the same as the midgut. And I've not been able to find any details about possibly any other functions or diverging function between the midgut and the hindgut. It's just not been studied yet. So that's all of the major features that Amphioxus has in the intestinal tract that we can see on this slide. I hope it's been interesting and that you've been able to follow along on the digital slide on the website. Consider leaving a like on this video. It does make me very happy to see that people have watched the video and actually enjoyed it. So next time we'll be exploring the nervous system, so the dorsal nerve cord. We'll have a little look at the notochord, so the structure underneath it, and then finally the rather impressive looking reproductive system that we've got on this slide. That will have to be after Christmas, so Merry Christmas to everybody. Have a safe one. And if you want to find out when the next video comes out, then consider subscribing to the channel. You can click the button, which I think I'll be able to put on this end screen. And obviously down below there's a button to subscribe. So thank you very much, and see you after Christmas.